Hi everybody, thank you for joining us tonight for this webinar on improving meeting productivity. I personally have a bit of a passionate hatred for meetings that are unproductive and that go on and on and on. So this webinar is for me is all about what can we do to improve the productivity of our meetings, get better outcomes from them, because there's an enormous cost in business and in all organisations to people sitting around in meetings and not getting productive outcomes out of them. So let's move on and talk about productive meetings and why bother. So some stats I found for you: the average CEO spends about 17 hours per week in meetings. Senior executives are up even 23 hours. Middle managers about 11 hours. So it's a lot of hours that management is spending in meetings a week, and some of you may even spend more than that time. The interesting fact is that senior and middle managers said that only 56% of their meetings were productive. They also added that a phone call or a memo could have replaced 25% of the meetings that they attend. So I don't think it matters where you sit on the continuum, the meeting continuum. We seem to be just wasting way too much time in our meetings. Now, I'm not suggesting that meetings are bad. I'm just suggesting that often the way we run them and our focus for them is not where we need to be, and that we probably shouldn't be spending all our waking hours in meetings. 23 hours a week in meetings is just crazy for lots of people. So let's talk then about, what can we do to reduce the number of meetings we're in and maybe increase the outputs or the outcomes from each of those meetings. And I've got sort of 5 tips for you here today. First thing is plan for success. So we're going to talk about what we're going to do to plan. We're going to talk about attendees, who should be there and why. We're going to talk about managing the time during meetings. We're going to talk about setting rules and processes up, and we're going to talk about being productive. Okay, so making sure we're productive. So let's work through each of those in turn. So I guess my first tip here is to plan your meetings. So I find that too many meetings are unplanned. We're not clear on what the purpose is. We don't understand what the rules are. We don't understand what we want to get from them. Meetings just happen. So my tool I use is a tool we call the PROD, and we've talked about PROD in other webinars, and it stands for Purpose, Rules, Outputs, and Deployment. Okay, and that was because actions started with an A and it was too hard. PROD sounded much better than PROA. Okay, so first thing you want to do is use this as a tool to plan or plan new meetings or current meetings. And the first thing is to sit down and say the purpose. Why bother? So why are we bothering to have this meeting? Is there a better way? Do we really need to have the meeting like that? But the first thing is to define is really clearly, what are we meeting for? What's the purpose of this meeting? What are we trying to achieve? The second thing then is to outline the rules. So, and I'm talking about the official and the unofficial rules of engagement of this meeting. So who needs to be there? When are we going to meet? Where is it going to be? What are we going to talk about? Some of that sort of stuff. Not the agenda, but what's the general focus of it going to be? Are there any specific rules about, if you don't turn up to a certain number of meetings, you get thrown out of the group or whatever it is? So just talk about what are the general rules, and there may only be a few of them. There's not lots of them, and it's not about creating a rule book. It's just about getting clarity around the purpose, and then I guess the rules for me are around the expectations. Outputs. What are the physical outputs going to be from this meeting? So there it's things like we will put out meeting notes, we'll put out an agenda, we'll publish that sort of stuff. So that's going to be the outputs from the meeting. So what are the concrete outputs you're going to have from each meeting? The last one then is deployment, and that's about actions, as I said. So how will it happen? Really, that's the agenda. So map out an agenda for each meeting that you stick to. Yeah. And you may need to adjust it, but I find most meetings we have a fairly similar, and that we can have a standard dashboard or a standard agenda that we work to, and that's a fairly simple way of doing things. There's another tool. So once you've done that, that's a planning tool, and you can get buy-in and sign off and all this other stuff you need to get around your prod. Then there's another tool that I use, and it's called PPP, and I use this at the start of every meeting where possible. And it comes from my colleague Mike Boyle, who from Banjar Consulting, and he talks about it as a tool that you use when you're cold calling, you're developing your plan for cold calling and sales. but I use it as a tool at the start of every meeting. And again, you just restate. So at the start of every meeting, in a 1-minute thing, you state the purpose, why we're here for, what's the process going to be today, so the agenda, what do we want the payoff to be? So why are we here? What do we hope to get out of this meeting? It's a really simple thing, and it's a really easy discipline to get into your head about how you're going to get the most out of this meeting. So planning, really important. Do the prod, map it out, get it right, so get the structure right, get all the thinking right, and then at the start of every meeting, just so everybody's clear, use purpose, process, payoff as a way of defining clearly why we're here and what we intend to do. That's my first tip. Second tip is about attendees. So you want to clarify attendees and roles. And if you look at it, so if somebody costs $50,000 per annum, if you look at it, that is actually a cost of $30 per hour. Yeah. So that's what their rate comes back to. So if you've got 5 people sitting around the table at $50K per annum, then you're looking at $150 per hour for those people to be sitting there. So you need to get a payoff from it. Chances are you're going to have people at much higher salaries on that sitting around the tables, and the costs start to get astronomical. Okay. So the first thing I would be doing is look at the prod. If you haven't done the prod, then look at your purpose, process, payoff, and ask the question: if the purpose of our meeting is to do X, then who should be here and why? And look around and say, who's here as observer? Why are they here observing? So if they're not actively engaged in the meeting, or they're just there to observe or listen to what's going on or whatever, is there a better use of their time, and is there a better way? And a tool for that you can use to help you get your head around about, I guess, why is somebody here is, why are we here? What are we doing? Why are these people here? You can use the 5 whys, and that's simply asking that question. So why? So can we give different results using another method? Why are we here? Why are these people here? And you just keep asking why, until you get down. Now, don't you have to use 5? You might get 3, but you might want to say, right, why are these people here? Because we're aiming to do this. Why are we aiming to do that? To get this particular outcome. Why do we want that outcome? To improve the profitability of our business. Okay, so that's fine. So everybody's not here who's engaged focused on improving the profitability of our business. Maybe could be somewhere else to do something. Okay, generating another thing. The other thing then is to talk about the roles. So what are the key roles in your meeting? A couple of roles that I like to talk about, and some people can do multiple roles, but the chair. So you need to have somebody who's going to chair it, facilitate it. And that's about driving the agenda and the processes and taking charge. So that's about cracking the whip on people, keeping to time, all that sort of stuff. Now the chairperson is often the timekeeper, but I've also seen that some chair people who are really good at chairing aren't necessarily good at keeping time. So sometimes it's useful to have a separate timekeeper who just keeps track of the time and keeps the chair on time for that sort of stuff. So you might have a little time, a person in there that is the time Nazi that takes control of the meeting and drives it according to the agenda. Another role that's common in meetings is a facilitator. So that's someone to workshop problem solving and processes and that sort of stuff. So that might be somebody who's skilled at getting up at the whiteboard, say, and taking the team through a process. So that can be useful. A scribe, it's really useful to have somebody whose responsibility is to record the key actions and notes. If they have legible handwriting, and we'll talk a little about where you do this handwriting a bit later, if they have legible handwriting, even better, because that saves you the problem of typing up notes and all that sort of stuff. So a scribe is really good. And the last one is an evaluator. And one of the things to really improve the performance of your meetings is to evaluate the meeting against the decision matrix. So a decision matrix is a tool that we use in Mindshop, and we'll have a link to different decision matrix. I also have an iPhone app that I've developed around the decision matrix. You can use the decision matrix to help you take corrective actions, or even a gap analysis, if you like, by evaluating the meeting against set criteria. So you can say, what are we going to evaluate our meeting against. But sitting at the end of every meeting and saying, how did we go, and having one person who's responsible for that is quite good. So I was part of a meeting just recently with some clients, and at the end of it, one of the guys who was running the meeting was the evaluator, and he said this was an absolutely terrible meeting. He actually put it in stronger language than that, and so we resolved that we would change some of the processes and tighten up some of the processes around what we're doing here. So that was a good outcome. So those are the roles that I see as important. There may be others, but a chair is somebody to run it, a timekeeper is somebody to keep it on track, facilitator is somebody who can get people's thoughts together, and the scribe is somebody to write down the key actions. So you don't need to write down the minutes, you just need to take the key actions. And then an evaluator should be somebody who assesses how we've gone against our plan. All right, so managing the time. So let's talk a little bit about some tools here that we can use to manage the time. The first one for me is making sure we keep meetings short. So one thing here you can do is just say, what will we have to do if we wanted to cut the time spent in this meeting by 50%? Yeah. So what we do if we aim to reduce the time spent by 50%, what will we do and how will we tighten it up? All right. My experience is you are better to have short, more frequent meetings with the right people in each meeting than you are to start and have much longer meetings less frequently with lots more people in them. Too many times we have people sitting around just taking notes and being there. Make sure you start and finish on time, because you'll find that people will have booked other activities and stuff around your meeting. So they'll have either appointments before or after or things to do. So make sure you start and finish on time. And a little tip there is to make sure you start at an odd time. So if you pick 8:07 or something else, people will often, if you just say 8 o'clock, they'll sort of trundle in wherever, but it's 8:07 sticks in their mind. Make sure you keep track of the time. We talked about it as a timekeeper. That's really important. When you look at your agenda, allocate the time for each agenda item and agree this in advance. So you can do that as part of your PPP at the front end if you like, but it's good to agree that this is how much we need to talk about, or you can circulate the agenda and get feedback on that prior to the meeting. Use a countdown timer for each agenda item. So countdown timer is this thing on your iPhone. I've got a slider one in a second, so use that. Or you get and so for each agenda item you can have a countdown timer. An iPad is excellent for that because it's a big screen you can set up at the table and watch it count down. Or use an alarm for the entire meeting. So you can use the alarm so it goes off after 90 minutes or at some point that gives you a link in it. So use a countdown timer like this. Yep, and just use it to pull things together. So tighten up things considerably. All right, so the other thing I guess I start to think about is what are some rules and processes. So we talked in the prod about rules that you may have and you may want to set. So some of my rules are set the meeting agenda in advance, do the PPP at the start of every meeting, and agree the timings for agenda items. Finish every meeting with a recap of the actions. So part of what we should be doing at every meeting is just recording the actions. Now I know for some meetings legally you need to keep minutes of discussions and that sort of stuff. So I'm not saying abrogate your legal responsibility, but often there is no need to keep minutes, and often the minutes are merely an interpretation of somebody else's view of what happened of the discussion. So often I find in boards and things that I've been on that often the minutes don't really reflect the true discussion. Sometimes it's what wasn't said or whatever that was picked up. So you've got to be a little bit careful about that. So make sure you keep though a recording of the actions that need to be taken. Okay, so make sure that you're doing that. So at least you record the actions, who's going to do them and when they're going to be done by. Great if you can use a template. So create a simple template for recording your actions and your notes. And there's a whole raft of those things on the internet. So Google is your friend there, but you'll often find that it says action, notes, all that sort of stuff. That's a great thing for stuff. Have rules for managing the discussion. So one of the reasons why meetings go over time is that we don't have any rules for how we're going to manage the discussion. So one of the ones I like is if it involves less than 3 departments or 3 team members or meeting participants are involved in a particular discussion, then take it offline. So 3 or less. So take it offline. That way you don't have the other 6 people sitting around while 2 people discuss something that's important to them. Make sure they take it offline and just ask them to stay back at the end of the meeting and finish that off. What do you do if your discussion goes longer than the time that you've allocated? Do you extend it and drop an agenda item off? Or if the meeting's going longer, do you reconvene to discuss it? So you need to think about what some of those rules might be, and certainly at least have the chairman pose them and say, righto, we allocated 10 minutes for this discussion. We're at 9 minutes now. What are we going to do? We haven't seemed to resolve it. I think we should take it offline and do it another time, or reconvene to talk about it, or a small group of us can come back and do it. So think about some of those rules and processes that are going to make your meeting far more productive. Okay. And the last one here is focus on producing outcomes. So we've already defined the outcomes that we wanted in our prod. So make sure you're focused on delivering those. So if it's an agenda or it's some meeting notes, make sure you do those. As I said, make sure you recorded the actions and that you've recorded them. Recap the actions at the next meeting. So if you've recorded actions at this meeting, one of the agenda items should be what actions do we agree to last time and how do we go? So following up from that sort of stuff. So don't just let actions slip under the table. Keep them going. Think about your meeting. What's the purpose of it? If it's just for communication of information to people, is there a better way? I find too many meetings are about so-called communication, and often there's a better way to communicate that information. So have a think about it. Good tip is to use a whiteboard or a flip chart to record notes and actions. And then if you write reasonably neatly, it's then just a matter of using photos of the whiteboard to circulate those actions. So you don't have to type them up and you don't have to do all that sort of stuff. You can just take a photo and circulate via email or something, or text, whatever you want to do to people. But a number of smartphones nowadays is a very easy way to sort information. You just got to have somebody take the time and write the actions or whatever on the whiteboard. Plenty of organizations I go into, the actions stay on the whiteboard until the next meeting, so it's like a permanent record. That's okay. But it's a great idea to take a photo of them and do them. The other thing I think with actions to think about is that if your name is mentioned in an action, so if you're responsible for a particular action, then you shouldn't be waiting for the minutes to come to you to action that. So one of the rules you might want to include is if your name is mentioned down as an action, so in the recap at the end where we go through the name and we tell everybody, okay, these are the actions out of today, so we're all in agreement. If your name's mentioned, you need to take a note of it then and there so that you can start action on it straight away and not use the old excuse of, I didn't get the meeting notes until later, so I didn't really realize I had to do that. That happens all the time, so be clear about that. Any relevant information from meetings and that sort of stuff, post them on your internet, Dropbox, that sort of stuff, or your meeting notes or agendas, all that sort of stuff. So use technology to help you get the leverage around the things you need to do to be productive for your meetings. Okay, so there were top tips. So there were sort of 5 top tips there. So, plan your meetings, aim to be more productive, use tools like, the prod, purpose, rules, outputs, deployment. Okay, so what's the prod? So do a prod on every group you're a part of and every meeting you're a part of, and do that. Use PPP at the front of a way of stating what the purpose, the process for today, what the agenda is going to be, and what we want the payoff to be, what the outcomes need to be. So that's what we need to do. Use agendas as a tool. So circulate those in advance and make sure that people are clear on why we're here and what we're doing and what the time is. Make sure you have the right people involved. So sometimes you're going to make some hard calls there and chat to people and say, really, this is not what you be. I often find those people actually know they don't want to be there and they'd rather be anywhere else but that meeting. So often it gives them a way out. And I know companies that basically say if you feel like you don't want to be at a meeting, you should tell us because that means the meeting is not meeting objectives for everybody. So that can be a really good tool to say is, well, why don't people want to come to this meeting? what are we not doing that's important to them is part of their role. Make sure you manage the time carefully. So take charge of the process, take charge of the time, and look after it well. Try and, I guess, set those objectives of how could we get through this information in half the time? What will we have to do if we were going to do something a bit different here and finish this meeting up quicker? Set the rules of engagement. You know, how do we want to play this game? Are there any particular rules with this? What are the rules around discussion and all that sort of stuff? Be productive. Focus on actions and outputs. So make sure you collect actions. I believe meetings should all be about actions and discussion of those. So get stuck into what are the actions that drop out of this? What do we need to do about it? Who's going to do it by when? Be smart and use technology to enhance the communication around that. So take photos, do all those sorts of things. Just make sure you've got reasonable handwriting so people can write it. And we don't have to worry nearly as much about typing up and having official meeting notes and all that sort of stuff. A lot of time and energy wasted in typing up notes that really don't need to be typed for any reason whatsoever. So make sure you use the technology there to be as productive as possible. Just about done. Just some resources that I use here to help me here. I use an app called Whiteboard Capture Pro. It's an iPhone app. I'm not sure if it's available for Android, but it's a great app. And what it does is digitize your whiteboard, so it takes all the shine and the bright spots and all that stuff out of your off the back of the whiteboard, and it pops the writing pops up. So it makes it far easier and far more legible to read because it digitizes it. So it's a great app. I think it's a couple of bucks, but it's well worth getting. I use it all the time. And then you could email those whiteboard notes around to the team or whatever straight from that app. So it's pretty smart like that. Or you can just transfer it by using your iPhone. You can email it to yourself and pass it on to other people, whatever you need to do. Use the clock app. So, there's some great apps. I'm sure there's specialist meeting timer apps you can find as well. But use some of the tools that are easily available on iPhones, iPads, tablets, smartphones, all that sort of stuff. They've all got timers and of different sorts on them, and use them to do that. Make sure you're keeping the time up. Heaps of options for storage. You may have an internal intranet. Make sure you set up an area for it where you store all the stuff related to the meeting or the committee or whatever it is that you're on. You can also use Dropbox and Mozy and a whole heap of other iCloud, or there's a heap of online storage mechanisms that you can use in order to store materials and share those with the group and that sort of stuff. So they're pretty smart ways to do that. That way you're not emailing everything around. You just put it into the Dropbox and everybody knows it's there. If you wanted to, you can use a tool like Evernote is another tool for using that. So it's a great tool. You can have a notebook for each group. You can share those notebooks with multiple people. Every time there's a new addition to that, so the meeting notes you might take with Evernote and store in Evernote, every time you synchronize back then, everybody else gets the full copy. So there's no need to email anything. They just synchronize and the note picks it up. It's pretty smart. Tools like Basecamp and that sort of stuff are pretty good as well. They're more project management tools, but you can certainly use them to track your actions and do all that sort of stuff. And there's a heap of those. CRMs often have meeting systems built into them that allow you to track meetings and activities out of meetings. So some of the smart ones there. And Google Drive's another great storage medium from there. A couple of books you might want to read are really quite good. Death by Meeting by Patrick Lencioni I found was excellent, so that was really quite good. And read this before our next meeting. Was a bit of a manifesto on meetings and how we could really improve meetings and that sort of stuff by Al I can't pronounce his name, I'm sorry, by Al P. So a couple of books there you might want to have a look at. I think even one of them could even be free or very cheap. So have a look at those. Some great options there. So meetings, massive cost to our industries, government, everything else. We spend a lot of time, tuning through meetings. Before we go to any questions, so if you've got any questions, you might start typing them into the questions box now. If you want to, just say, just put Mike in there and I'll open up the microphone for you if you want to verbally ask your question. while you're doing that, if you've got any questions, our next webinar is going to be on Thursday, June the 19th, so a couple of weeks away, 3 weeks away. Same time, 5:30 in the afternoon. We're going to be talking about lifting customer service in your business. So some tips and tools there for lifting customer service in your business. In the meantime, any questions? Cameron seems to have lost some audio. Sorry about that, mate. Another question. Is there an ideal length of time for a meeting? I'm finding lots of... sorry, you guys lost audio there. I'm finding lots of people are looking for shorter and shorter meetings. So I'm finding don't like calling them meetings either. I'm thinking a lot of the things we can do now is have some what I call huddles. So one of the things we can do is I find a meeting, if we call it a meeting, everybody turns up with a cup of coffee and you're there for 20 minutes whether you like it or not. If you call it a catch-up or a huddle or something else, particularly if you have it as a stand-up meeting, you can normally power through some of these meetings in 5 to 10 minutes and cover a lot of the things that you need to, particularly if you're doing that short, frequent, regular meeting, then you can actually get away with a lot shorter meetings. But for many meetings, it'd be great if you can keep them to less than half an hour. Been helping clients with like internal board meetings and that sort of stuff. We're getting through meetings that used to take an hour or two in 30 minutes now, just by focusing on a clear agenda and not going through the motions. We're actually just talking about the things that matter. So, all right. So I'm going to leave it there. So if there's no further questions, we'll head off. Look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. Don't forget, we will send out the details for where the recording is and all the information is in the next few days. And look forward to seeing you again soon. Hope you have a great week. Thanks a lot.